Welcome back. As promised, we are bringing you part 2 of my interview with Matthew Desmond. He's the author of Evicted, Poverty and Profit in the American City. And he spent months embedded in a Milwaukee trailer park to chronicle his experience. Of course, you then embedded yourself in a trailer park. Tell us about that. How many months were you there? And was it difficult for you to sort of separate your living situation, which was one of choice, from those of whom you were observing?
Right, so I lived in a trailer park in Milwaukee for about 5 months. Then I lived in an inner city rooming house for about 10 months. And I followed families getting evicted, and I followed their landlords doing the evicting, and I tried to write about their lives. And you're right, it was a research endeavor, it was a reporting endeavor. But I think that, for me, it was trying to embed myself as deeply as I could in their lives. So I slept on their floor and ate from their table and watched their kids and went to funerals and births and church with them and tried to write about their lives as completely as I could.
And I'm sure that as an academic that studies this, you entered the situation with certain ideas or preconceived notions. Were there things that surprised you?
Absolutely. I mean, I thought eviction was a problem. But, Milwaukee, we learned that 1 in 14 renter homes in the inner city is evicted every single year, which is incredible. That means walk down about any street in the inner city of Milwaukee, look to your left and your right, one of those homes is gone by the end of the year. When we've calculated this nationwide, we've learned that 2.3 million people lived in homes that were served an eviction filing in 2016. 2.3 million. How big is that number? That's like all the drug arrests that happened that year times 2. That's like every tragic overdose from the opioid epidemic times 36. It's an enormous problem. So that was incredibly surprising to me.
And the sort of the layer, the buffer that a lot of these families or people seem to have is so thin, so delicate, that if it frays, there's no recovery.
That's right. And so when you look at this problem from a sidewalk level, you see moms having to choose between food and rent. You see moms trying to say, should I pitch in for this funeral or pay the gas bill? You see people put in these tragic, incredibly sad choices. And when you're paying 70, 80% of your income to rent, a very small thing can get you evicted. So for folks, that are in that position, eviction is much more the result of inevitability than irresponsibility. You're gonna fall behind sometime.
And of the families that you followed, how many of them ended up getting evicted, and did any of those families then make their way back into a home?
Yes, some did and some don't. But one thing that I saw, and this was later verified with statistics, is when they do find their way into a home, they find their way into a worse home. Okay, they're moving into conditions that are bad. Maybe they're moving to a place with no heat or busted windows. And that's because a lot of landlords are seeing that eviction notice and saying no. And so they're pushed into worse housing, and then they're pushed into worse neighborhoods after they get evicted. And we know that's terrible for kids.
And tell us about your personal journey as an academic, as a professor. What got you interested in homelessness, in the cycle of poverty?
So America is the richest country with the worst poverty. That's who we are. And to understand that, we had a lot of research on jobs, on welfare, on the family, on public policy. Those are incredibly important topics, but there seemed to be a big piece of the puzzle that was missing. That was housing. What is about housing, especially the private rental market where most low-income families live today? What is it about that sector that contributes to poverty? And what can we do about the housing crisis to lift people out of poverty? That's what I was trying to get after.
And are there two sides to the story? Because of course we hear the story of the mother and her children, and it's heartbreaking. But also, many of these landlords are not necessarily wealthy, daddy Warbucks types. These apartments that they own and may be renting out may be how they are surviving as well, correct?
Correct. And so there's more than two sides. There's a million sides to this story. And I think that, look, there are some landlords that are playing by the rules. There are some landlords that are breaking the law. There are tenants that are playing by the rules, and there are tenants that are breaking the law. And so it's very complicated. And I think when we start demonizing one party over another, we come up with very simple answers. And the book tries to complicate that relationship and tell the story from multiple sides.
And so then what conclusions do you draw after having lived in it the way that you did, after seeing it firsthand and getting a real understanding of the problems people face at the lowest echelons of society? What do you propose to fix it?
Well, I think we first have to understand that eviction isn't just a condition of poverty, it is also a cause of poverty. It's making things worse, and it's leaving a deep and jagged scar on the next generation. So if we want to fix inequality in America, we have to fix housing. So what do? So the good news is the programs that we have now, they work pretty well. Like when families receive a housing voucher, for example, after years and years on the waiting list, so they don't pay 60 or 70% of their income on rent, they pay 30, they do one consistent thing with their freed up money. They take it to the grocery store, right? They buy more food. Their kids become stronger and less anemic. They move to better neighborhoods. They don't move as much. They work. But they only exist for the lucky minority of poor families today. Most Americans suffering from the housing crisis don't get any kind of help from the government and are forced to give most of their money, not to their kids, but to their landlord or utility company. That's wrong.
So what specific policy changes would you like to see enacted?
I think we should take the programs that we already have and expand them. It's like we've underdosed the problem. And so if we expanded housing assistance through more vouchers, more public housing, I think that would make a big difference.
Matthew Desmond, thank you so much for coming to see us.
Thanks for having me.